When it was light enough to use the binoculars, he glassed the valley below.
The Sad Boys Book Club.
Looking for anything of color, any movement, any trace of standing smoke.
You forget what you want to remember.
Then, he just sat there holding the binoculars and watching the ashen daylight congeal over the land. He only knew the child was his warrant. He said, if he is not the word of God, God never spoke. The man scanned the horizon with his binoculars. Through the ashen snow that drifted through the sky, he spied a radio tower. Come on. They trekked through a dead town, walking over the buckled roads and past the creaking houses that moaned in the dirty breeze. Eventually, they crested a hill, and they stood out in front and peered through the rusty gates. The man boosted the boy over the gate. Careful now. Lift that latch for me. The gate swung open and they ambled through the courtyard and into the station. Miraculously, a few bulbs dimly illuminated the halls. The man's eyes passed over the posters for meet and greets and morning show hosts. In his father's day, they played a wop bop a loo bop a wop bamboo. In his day, they played she lick me like a lollipop. Now, in his son's day, there was only silence. The boy saw the red light was on in the recording booth.
What's this?
It's a microphone.
Were you on the radio before?
No, I had a podcast.
Did a lot of people listen to your podcast?
Actually, it's very hard to cultivate an audience. It was a crowded marketplace.
Okay.
Welcome to the Sad Boys Book Club. My name's Dusty.
And I'm Daniel.
And we're doing The Road by Cormac McCarthy.
As you might have guessed from that intro, we are reading Cormac McCarthy, specifically his 2006 novel, The Road.
Now, maybe this is just, this is me not really being into the book culture of the times, because I don't think I'd ever heard of the book itself until the movie a couple years later. It was kind of a shock to me when I picked up this book last week that it was 2006. I was like, oh, this must be a re-release edition. And I looked and it was like, no, it came out in 2006. I could have sworn it was older.
Yeah, a lot of McCarthy's work is quite a bit older. It's like the 80s and 90s. Maybe something from the 70s. I'm actually not like a super close McCarthy scholar. He's actually one of the people that I've wanted to read a lot more of, so I'm glad we're doing this. But I didn't realize just quite how recent some of his stuff was. Although I do remember, like, he was really big around this time. Like the man was going on Oprah, which for the younger listeners and people who maybe don't remember, was basically the one of, if not the most watched show. It was like top 3 easily most watched shows in America. So like we're talking like full McCarthy fever. Like, actually, Dusty, that the version that you had that you showed me is actually an Oprah book club version.
Yeah, which I'm gonna go ahead and plug this. I got my copy from my local library, like I did with The Stranger. Support your local libraries. They're amazing. They're fantastic. And if you want to save some money and not necessarily spend $15 to $40 purchasing a book, check your local library, see if they have it. I don't know. You might have a good time.
Yeah. It's, 100% support for the libraries. Stand up for your local libraries. Show up for your local libraries.
Yeah, now is especially a really good time to show support for your local libraries with all the craziness going around in the country surrounding them. So please, please, please support your local library if you can.
Yeah, I mean, so McCarthy, he was really big. Actually, in preparation for this, I actually even was looking up stuff on McCarthy, and I was trying to read about his style and the way he wrote, because he has a very unique voice that I attempted to create a facsimile there at the beginning. It's very terse, it's very plain spoken with minimal punctuation, right? So we're talking like very few commas, any quotes that are the characters talking, the dialogue, no quotation marks. It's just you have to be, on your game. You have to be kind of understand, like, so like they'll just, we're talking, they separate with line breaks between dialogue phrases. So one character will say something, no quotation marks, no like saying like blank said, or whatever. Then it's just the phrase, and then a line break, and then the response, then another line break. So there's something about it that's very it's interesting in a way too. It's almost I guess a little bit Hemingway-esque in that it's like very clean prose, and it's very to the point. Does that did you kind of find that when you were reading?
Yeah, it definitely took me some time to get used to. I think the first night I stopped somewhere around page 35, and my first thought was, this man hates punctuation almost as much as the fact that I hate that he hates punctuation.
Yeah, that was something that I thought too. Like that first night was, I think I stopped around, I don't know, 25 or so. I'm not really remembering, but it was kind of tough that first to just kind of like learn how to read it. But once you get into it, especially because it's a very engrossing and atmospheric novel, it goes pretty quickly.
Yeah, I definitely feel a little more acclimated to it now, to where I don't notice it. But I will say, there was a spot that stuck out to me. It was, I don't know, somewhere in the late 80s or early 90s on the pages. I noticed like 3 commas in one paragraph, and I was like, wait a minute, did he just learn how to write? But then it stuck out to me for a second. So that was weird. It almost kind of like flips my brain around to where at first I was noticing the lack of punctuation every time it happened, to by the time I finished our section that we're covering today, it was the fact that there was punctuation that stuck out to me, which I thought was pretty funny.
Well, I think maybe when we get closer to that, if you want to look at it again, we could talk about it. Maybe there was something that was being there's a reason for it. Maybe just to really hone in on something. I don't know, but that's kind of like the general thing. Another thing that I've noticed a lot is his choice of diction is usually like pretty like plain spoken, but then sometimes will hit with like this incredibly specific word that's like very difficult, or at least if not difficult, kind of rare, but is very fitting to the situation.
Yeah, it definitely feels like 99% of this book is middle school reading level, and then he'll throw in a college level word that even, like, I am not going to claim that I have some crazy, amazing, diverse vocabulary. I have probably, if we're being really honest here, an upper high school level, maybe lower college level vocabulary, and that might be generous. So there were plenty of words that I looked at and I'm like, I don't know what this word means, but I have enough context given the context clues of the sentence to where I don't feel like I need to look it up, and I'm just going to move on.
Another thing that I noticed that he'll sometimes like mash some words together, like in the pantry there were 3 jars of home canned tomatoes. Instead of home canned, it's home canned. Or like or handles, that kind of stuff. Pump organ instead of pump organ. There's some words that he just kind of fuses together, and it's kind of interesting. I feel like it must be kind of liberating. I would say if you're him, because if you don't bother with punctuation, then you don't have to worry about it. You're like, I'm not going to put a comma. And so I from a certain standpoint, it's almost kind of as a failed writer, there is a certain sort of enviable quality in that he was able to stake out that lane. Another thing that I've noticed a little bit about his writing style that I kind of want to get into is that the terseness also is in the, and I wonder if this is something that is true of this book or all of his books, because I haven't read any of his other books. A lot of the dialogue is also very short and clipped. So I don't know. There's something about it that creates this effect, like the very short and to the point dialogue, the very unique sentence structures. It feels. I don't want to say postmodern, but post-apocalyptic. It fits the post-apocalyptic vibe, right? So there's minimal punctuation. There's no, like, a lot of the structures that you think of when you think of books, like the way the pages even lay, or the chapters. There are no chapters. It's just like, it's like a big, you'll go on for, lots and lots of pages, and then there'll be like a break, like a few lines. If you had a page in front of you and you just hit enter about 3 or 4 times, and then you start it again, So, or sometimes there'll be like that, and then a little ellipsis in the middle, and then you go on. So it's kind of like that. It's kind of it's another one of those interesting, uniquely structured books, kind of like. Not exactly like House of Leaves. It's a little more traditionally formulated than that, but it's a similar kind of conceit in my mind, that it sort of fits the sort of post-apocalyptic setting of the novel itself.
Yeah, it almost feels like a journal, where instead of having a book that he's keeping his thoughts collected in, it's like he's finding any scrap of paper he can.
That is a really interesting way to look at it, and I think that's brilliant. I think that's kind of how it is. It's like, it's so on. If you had to do scratch paper that you just found anywhere, you'd have to be very economical in your word choice and all that. And if it wasn't for, like, theoretically for mass consumption, I mean, obviously this is, but like to build on your conceit, you wouldn't necessarily bother doing a lot of punctuation or a lot of, like, this person said this, that person said that, that kind of thing.
Yeah. If this is something that is consistent with McCarthy's work, this doesn't necessarily apply as well as I'm trying to make it right now, but it almost does have this form of de-evolution of the human condition that you would see in a post-apocalyptic setting, to where society has fallen and our literary rules and styles have fallen too.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the part of the effect that you get. I think that's a well taken point. Another thing that kind of links to our last book, although all of these parallels were fully unintentional, was that not a lot of character names. In fact, I would say fewer than the previous book. Like, this one has none that I've come across.
No, it's basically just titles. The man, the boy.
There are 2 main characters that we have are basically known as the man and the boy, a father and his son, and that's really, and that's basically it. Like, they've run into, at least to the point we've gotten to the book, very few people, and the people they have run into were not given names. So it also has this very anonymous feel in that respect, which is kind of again kind of suits the post-apocalyptic feel. It's like the socially constructed identities have been destroyed because society itself has been destroyed.
So this is for lack of a better term, a weird book to talk about. I feel I feel like we have a general, not really a plot, but a goal in mind for our characters. We know that they're traveling south, and the man wants them to hit the coast, where I think he's wanting to assume that it's going to be warmer, because he thinks it's around October, November, and it's really cold. I guess they're in the Northeast right now, maybe.
The what I'm getting from this is like they're in the mountains.
Like
One thing that
Appalachian?
I thought that's kind of what I was thinking. I was thinking maybe they're in like North Carolina or West Virginia even, or somewhere kind of north-ish, or maybe they're coming south from like Ohio or something like that, and they're heading south, and then they're coming through the Appalachian Mountains right now, and then they're trying to get south to the coast. So I guess I think they're probably trying to trek. That's what I would guess is where they're trying to trek through.
Yeah. So it feels like a lot of just either small character moments or small world building moments that we just kind of get thrown in as we travel with them down the road.
Yeah, it's not like a lot of constant action and plot. It's just like an interwoven. Well, sometimes that happens, but mostly it seems to be like an interwoven series of vignettes.
Yeah. So I feel like it's kind of hard to talk about in that regard. It's not like something like Leviathan Wakes, where we have this very clear and present plot that we can talk about and go and follow through, or even something like The Stranger, where there are a lot of abstract or psychological ideas that we can talk about or kind of philosophize about. So I feel like this is a book where there's a lot more to it in terms of its format and its style more than its substance itself, if that makes sense.
I think I understand what you're saying.
I will say though, it's very gripping in a way. I find myself I'll be reading it and suddenly I'm 10 pages deep and it's like, oh, okay, this is it's very short. That helps. The pages aren't very big. There aren't a huge amount of words per page, so it's a page turner in the sense that you get through the pages quickly just by the nature of how big it is. So that helps. But it almost has this sense of attachment to it, to where after maybe 10 or 15 pages, I think it may vary depending on from person to person, you get this form of attachment to the man and the boy, to where you're like, okay, I need to see how this goes, what they might encounter, what's going on with this world. It almost immediately throws out all these questions that you can't help but feel like you need to see some sort of answer to. So it keeps you engaged despite its very unorthodox nature.
Yeah, very unorthodox and very very sparse nature. Like it's like I said, and like kind of like Dusty said, there's not really like at least to this point, maybe this is something that we're gonna look back and we're gonna kind of see how things kind of turn out, because there's moments that, and they're not marked, but if you're paying attention, you'll realize that it's a flashback. There's like this one sequence where the man, aka the father, he's remembering the night that the world changed. Right? He says that he saw outside of his window. Was it like a rose-colored glow or something like that?
Yeah, I'm assuming it was a nuke.
Yeah, it was. That was my assumption as well. I think that the nature of this apocalyptic world is some kind of like nuclear winter scenario. There's like a lot of ash and debris in the air, and like that's one thing that I didn't mention earlier that probably should have. They do have like filters and like they're having to like they're having to protect themselves from that in addition to the harsh conditions.
I totally forgot about the masks that they were wearing until you brought it up just now, because it's something that is only mentioned in the first couple of pages, and it hasn't been brought up again since, unless it's referring to the groups that we've come across so far and them wearing their masks.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I didn't really even think about it until I was just thinking back, trying to connect the events. But yeah, it looks like it's like some sort of nuclear winter scenario.
They should have gone to the Mojave.
Yeah, I mean that'd be a lot warmer, certainly. let's see. So they're kind of like living this like condition where they're scrounging. They'll mention that they are eating little stores of like old food. Like they're saying they ate a can of beans. They heated up a can of corn over their fire. That kind of stuff. But this world that they live in is a profoundly dangerous world. It is one that is like beset by raiders, all kinds of like murderers, enslavers. There's a lot of references. This is just like an off the top. Usually I'm not sure why I do it this way, but that's just the way it's worked out. But I sometimes will talk about whether a book has or does not have troublesome content, and I kind of throw that in with my closing thoughts. But I guess we'll say up at the top, this book, content warning, any and all, pretty much. It's like there's like a lot. It's a violent world. It's a cruel world. There's references to sexual assault. It's basically the world has quite literally pretty much gone to hell. All right, so they're like Dusty mentioned before, they're trying to head south, and they're kind of like subsisting on these like the residual reserves that they found from the previous before the apocalypse, so like cans of beans and corn. And that's another thing that kind of is like a if there's any kind of plot that ties the moment to moment together, it's this idea that they're slowly running out of food. Like their survival situation in the mountains is no longer tenable, and that's a big reason why they're heading south. Like they're running out of food, and it's getting colder.
Yeah. I will say I think their idea of the cart is pretty ingenious.
Oh yeah, that's what I was just about to get to. So they find this shopping cart, and they use it to help them push their gear and their packs and their supplies along. I agree that I thought that was pretty clever. So they're kind of like they're pushing the cart along, and they see the one thing that the father does have is like a pair of binoculars, so that from time to time, usually, I wouldn't say that these are where the chapter breaks are, but it does kind of feel like whenever the binoculars come out, and I don't know if this is something that he did consciously or not, but it feels like when the binoculars come out that there's like a new sequence, a new segment of the book is kind of starting. Would you say that's a kind of a fair assessment?
I hadn't thought about that, but now that you mention it, it does feel like a form of a chapter break in some facet. It's there, not necessarily the start of a new struggle, but it's the start of I think how you put it was pretty good.
So there, he's looking at using his binoculars, and he's kind of looking around. Through this town that they're passing through. And, we can kind of see, like, at first, this is, like, the harsh reality of the post-apocalyptic world. They're seeing, like, these dead bodies just strewn about. It's pretty dark, if you can imagine, they don't really say how old the boy is, the son. But I would imagine somewhere, like, 8 to 10. What were you kind of thinking?
I was thinking maybe like 7 to 10. So yeah, we're in about the same spot.
Yeah, and the boy has this remarkable innocence, and as we will see later, he has a lot of compassion for the residual compassion for people. And I think that's something he is almost the father-son dyad is almost kind of a representation of humanity. The father, represents the resilience and strength and determination. The son kind of represents the compassion, the innocence, I don't want to say innate gentleness, but I think there is a certain how to put this. I think most people in their hearts, or at their core, are at least decent people. And I think that's kind of what the boy does represent. Although I don't know if Cormac McCarthy would agree with me necessarily. This is a very, I don't want to say nihilistic book necessarily, but it is pretty pessimistic. It does have a very pessimistic view on what would happen to society after some sort of catastrophic event. Because as we mentioned before, it's essentially just there is no society. It's basically just lone, maybe not entirely lone straggling survivors, because they do talk about in one interlude they do talk about seeing like group there being theoretically groups of refugees, but it seems like those are kind of isolated. There's a lot of individual survivors, and there's these roving gangs of psychotic, evil, beyond all imagining kind of criminals.
Would you say that there is a bit of misanthropy in this book?
If it wasn't for the boy, I would say that might be true. But I think the boy is a very, very powerful symbol in the book, and the father too. Like the desire to protect, and the desire, and then the compassionate side, and their sort of very powerful mutual love. That even though a lot of the words are very seem very flat, there is a lot of connection in there. There, like, you can once you learn how to read for it, you see that there is actually a very profound connection between the father and the son.
Yeah, one thing it does feel like is that the father is a representation of the hardened mankind in this
Mm-hmm.
new world, and the boy seems to be like a relic of humanity prior to.
Yeah, that's actually something that I was thinking about this morning too. Is like, it's actually kind of interesting that the father represents the new world and the son represents the old world. It's kind of an inversion of the way people typically look at those kind of things.
Yeah, like a poetic irony.
Mm-hmm. There's just something like, then he just sat there, holding the binoculars and watching the ashen daylight congeal over the land. He only knew that the child was his warrant. He said, "If he is not the word of God, God never spoke." And it's just like very powerful sentences like that really highlight that connection between father and son.
I can't wait for the Road 2, where the boy has now created his own religion.
Boyism.
Yeah, I am the Messiah. I am the boy.
Boy.
Yeah, we do get a moment. I'd like to speak about this. We get a moment pretty early on, and hang on, I need to go grab my prop for this. Where they're traveling through. I can't remember if it was the gas station or if it's before the gas station, but they stumble upon a can of Coke.
Oh yes, that was a very touching scene, where the father offers the can of Coke to his son, who is just he loves it, because like if you gave a soda to someone, to the metaphorical medieval peasant, that it would just rewire their brain chemistry. They wouldn't even know. It would be just so probably delicious and different, just blow their minds. And so he wants his son to have that experience, to have that little bit of residual pleasure from the old world that is now dead. And so he lets his son have it. And I thought that was a very tender moment as well. Another connecting thread. Speaking of, because you mentioned the next part where they share the, or he gives his son the can of Coke.
If it was me in that situation, that kid would have gotten a sip of Coke and the rest would have gone to me.
You're like, look, kid, you don't know what you're missing, so don't worry about it. I'm the one that's suffering here. I'm the one that's not had Coke. You don't know what you're missing, so you're just you'll sit tight. What you don't know is not gonna hurt you. And now, if you'll excuse me, I'm about to crack open a cold one. But what I was gonna say. The father, another thread that kind of like ties things is like the father's worsening cough. The man has a case of literary tuberculosis. One of the oldest literary and really storytelling tropes is like the idea of a guy that's coughing up blood and gradually getting worse. So that's another kind of through line, is like the man, his health is deteriorating. So I think that's another impetus to try to get him south. He wants to get his son somewhere where he feels like he has a better chance of surviving. I think that's an unspoken motivation of the father as well.
Yeah, I don't think the father is going to make it to the end of the book.
I think he's going to make it to like the last few pages.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's going to die at the end, is what I'm getting at.
Oh yeah, anytime somebody has the bloody cough, they're toast.
Yeah, which this might be jumping ahead a bit, but one of the things they have is the handgun, which at this point in time has 2 bullets in it, and I think the current situation is use the gun as a deterrent, and if absolutely necessary. I don't believe he thinks that he could ever do this, but I think he has it almost as a contingency plan, one for the boy, one for me.
I did think that did come to mind. That's another thing that's not spoken, but there is a certain inescapable symmetry there that makes you think like maybe that's what he is thinking. Like he's like, if they ever get into a bad enough situation, because and there's something called, and this kind of gets along with the next portion of where we're heading, is like this idea of, they're referred to in the books of as blood cults. We don't really know much about them, but I think that name basically tells you what you need to know, essentially, is that they are roving gangs that just kill and I think eat people. I think they're cannibalistic. I think that's something that we're supposed to also kind of take from that. That's at least implied at this point.
Yeah, the jumping ahead a little bit again, the mother does really heavily emphasize that if they're lucky, it seems like they will be killed, eaten, and raped.
Yeah, it's as I said before, full content where like anything and everything. It's a pretty dark book.
Yeah, there's a line I really quickly want to bring up. There's a line, I think it happens twice so far, where the boy asks if they're the good guys, and the man says, "Yes, we are." And I feel like normally something like that is done as a, not necessarily like a coping thing, but where it's like they did something bad, and a character's like, "Are we the baddies?" And the guy's like, No, we aren't," but they actually are. I feel like there's no real argument here that, yes, relatively speaking, they are the good guys in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, when the alternative is literal slavers and insane cannibal cults, yeah, you are the good guys, pretty much.
Mean, yeah, they didn't help the man that got struck by lightning, but it very much is the man was in the right there. I have a feeling that if they had the means and the capability to help him, I think the man would have. But he understood that this dude's going to die, so I can either show him an act of kindness before his death that will hurt us in the long run, or just keep moving.
What could they have done, really? I mean, they didn't really have anything. It's sad and it was terrible. It was a very emotionally affecting passage, but it's like, like you're saying, the father is right. There was really nothing that could be done for that man.
Yeah, it's like I said, all they could give him would be an act of kindness, and it would have potentially cost them later on down the road, only so that this person could maybe, and this is strong, maybe have something nice happen for him before he dies. That dude's in bad shape. His eye was like burned shut.
Yeah.
His hair was all ashy and charred. He was in real bad shape.
Wasn't part of his skull exposed in one part?
I think so.
Yeah. Let's see. There's a lot of so yeah, they're kind of pushing their cart and they're portioning through the mountains. That is correct, Dusty's something that's something that they say or that they see when they're kind of walking by and they see this man like that. He's basically, these kind of these images of these shambling figures that are essentially the Walking Dead. They do one thing that I remember that they did kind of do is they stopped as they were heading back south. They passed through the father's hometown, and he takes him into the house, and the father's thinking about all of his memories from his life, and the son is basically he's pretty scared the entire time. So he essentially just agrees that it was probably a mistake to come here, but it was I thought that was an interesting passage too. It's just like this idea of returning to his childhood home, but it's however many years on, and the home itself has fallen into disrepair. It was just a very it was more really good and interesting symbolism of the world that they once knew. Our world is now gone. It is well and truly dead.
Mm-hmm. I almost feel like that scene was a bit of a red herring too, because throughout it, the boy is scared, and it's almost like he's worried about something that's just around the corner, that's gonna jump out and attack them or something, and it really does end a little anticlimactically, which I imagine was the point. But I kept waiting for something to warrant the child's fear, but then nothing ever came, and suddenly we're on to the next scene. So I guess it's more of a commentary on the nature of the world that they live in, as opposed to anything else. Yeah,
it's so they're kind of getting through. They start to go through the mountains. They're pushing their cart up the mountain the whole time. This was something I was thinking. Sometimes you get those carts at a grocery store, and they can barely even travel through the grocery store. I'm wondering, like, how the heck are they pushing this cart up a mountain? They must have found like a mint condition, like fresh off the line grocery cart.
Well, remember they did. He did have to disassemble it and like grease up the wheels, right? At some point,
he did something to like reinforce one of the wheels. I do remember they do say one of the wheels stopped working, but I just thinking about the physical act of pushing a grocery cart up a mountain, that just sounds exhausting. Especially because when you factor in also the snow and all that.
Yeah.
That must have been crazy. That is the real triumph of the human spirit right there is a man who will push a grocery cart up a snowy mountain.
Yeah, and there was the bit where they go to another grocery store and he's looking at all the shopping carts there, so he doesn't find any that are worth anything. So it makes me wonder if the cart that they have is the first cart and only cart they've used so far, and B, how many times has he done something like that where he's had to repair or even replace pieces of it. So I feel like this might be Theseus's shopping cart at this point.
I think that's a fair interpretation, because Cormac McCarthy will sometimes, like, between these passages, you definitely can feel the passage of time sometimes, where it'll feel like they're about to go to bed, and then it'll be them, you know, and it seems like in seemingly the mid afternoon the next day, you know. So I think sometimes there's a certain thing to his writing style where he's not necessarily showing you beat by beat by beat by beat everything that's happening. I think it's a very this is a terrible way to look at it, but I'm going to make the comparison anyway. Instead of watching like a video of something, you're like looking at a series of photographs, if that makes sense. So it's not the continuous strand.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Can we very briefly talk about the mother?
Sure.
This might be jumping ahead a bit, but it really only comes in as a couple of flashbacks at two separate points in the book so far. So I feel like it's okay to kind of throw this in wherever. So you mentioned earlier the flashback that seems to be the start of this whole situation, and I don't know, maybe I have my timeline a little confused here. So she's holding a child, and he's turning on the bathtub, and I like this I thought this exchange was a little funny. She's like, "Why are you taking a bath?" And he's like, "I'm not." So my assumption, based on what was going on, is what I gathered he was doing. I could be wrong, but this was my interpretation of it. Was he was filling up the bathtub because since the electricity was out, he figured the water was going to be going out soon, so it's better to have a full bathtub of water in preparation for when that happens, as opposed to just being caught waterless.
Yes, actually, and this is your first Sad Boys Book Club survival tip. In the event of a nuclear occurrence, that is actually what you should do. You should, if you are in your home or your apartment or whatever, fill your bathtub.
Yeah, that felt really smart to me. I was like, is he filling that up just so they can have access to the water? That's really clever. That's something that I've personally never thought of. So that was really cool. The second flashback has to do with there's like she's giving birth, and he pulls the baby out and he cuts the cord, and it seemed to me, maybe this was me misunderstanding, but it seemed to me this was already in the post-apocalypse when this happened.
Yeah, I think her giving birth happened like a few days or weeks after the nuclear event, because remember they was talking about like the red glow and the power grid and all that, and that, you know how they were talking about their candlelit dinners while they were watching the cities burn and all that. That was already post-apocalypse, I guess, when the sun was born.
But when it said she was holding the child when in the scene where the bomb goes off, right?
Let me I don't remember. Let me go look real quick. It says she was standing in the doorway in her nightwear, comma, wow, clutching the jam, comma, oh, 2 commas in one sentence, cradling her belly with one hand. What is it? She said. What is happening?
Okay. Yep. I don't know how I read that as cradling the baby. That was a reading error on my part. That fixes that qualm that I had as to where the timeline is going with this. The last one that we get, at least so far, is, for lack of a better term, her death, where she's complaining that they should have used the gun on all of them when they had 3 bullets. Now they have 2, and she's like, I'm gonna go kill myself, and he's asking her not to, and she's just like, well, you're not gonna stop me, I made up my mind, I'm gonna go kill myself. And one thing I do find kind of weird, you mentioned earlier that a lot of the dialogue is very kind of to the point and very simple, and then in this flashback with the mom, she has like 2 paragraphs where she's just it's almost Shakespearean the way that she talks, and it felt really jarring to me because you do have the situation where there are a lot of conversations that are very, very cut and dry, just very simple, and then she's using like these really big poetic words, talking about how
And metaphors, too.
yeah, and how she's a slut because she's found a new lover in the form of death, which was a very weird thing to say. Like that was weird to me.
Well, yes. I was. That's something that McCarthy. I think there's a lot of good things can be said about him, but I think that was a very. And I understand what he's going for, right? I understand that he's trying to, and why she's saying those things. But it is a little weird. I don't know that I necessarily would have put it that way.
Yeah, I think the point and the message of that section was totally fine, and it was very well fit into the book, but her dialogue felt really, really strange to me, and it was very jarring. Like I said, it's just I don't know. That might be my least favorite part of the book so far. Specifically, what she said, not anything else, but just the words that she used felt really just very out of nowhere to me.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I fully agree. I think that was. I understand what the author, what Cormac McCarthy's trying to do, but I did feel that was probably my least favorite portion so far, and it also just didn't, especially given the rest of the book, it felt very out of nowhere, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I feel like, going off of the things that we were given, she has maybe some sort of resentment toward the boy, because she said that, I don't remember exactly what she said, but something along the lines of, my life ended when I gave birth. Or maybe like her will to live ended when she gave birth. Like the boy took her soul or something like that. I can't remember the exact line. But she has a lot of negativity towards their situation, and she wishes that he would have killed her, the boy, and himself when they had the bullets to do so. So yeah. She basically, after whittling him down to the point to where he can't fight her anymore, she just gets up and leaves to die. How she goes to die, I don't think it's important, so we just know that she leaves to die, and that's how the mother goes, so to say. I feel like that scene could not have been more than a few weeks before the start of the book.
I think that's a good way to look at it. And also, as I'm looking at it, I found that line you were talking about. She said, "My heart was ripped out of me the night he was born, so don't ask for sorrow now." So, but yeah, I think she mentions that they don't have enough bullets for him to kill them all with the gun, and and as we know, with where the father is at right now in the story, he only has 2 bullets. So I feel like that must have happened pretty recently, and the boy is still not over it. Like actually what leads to that is the boy like talking about how he misses his mom and his dad. He doesn't really know how to handle that, so he's like, because he himself is also kind of grieving, because it was. Let's be honest here. That was a very traumatic event for the father. It would be a traumatic event for anybody if your partner was like, no, I'm going to kill myself. I wish you had killed me. And when our child was born, that was basically when my life ended. So so he doesn't really know how to deal with it. So when the boy is talking about missing his mother, he's just like, just don't talk about it. Just because it's too painful for him to really even reckon with, because he as an adult can't reckon with it, so he doesn't know how to help the child.
Yeah, and I mean no pun intended here, but it feels very heartless on her part during their final discussion, because she basically tells him, because he's saying, what about our child and all that, and she's like, that's your problem, deal with it. And he's like, I can't do this alone. And she's like, well, too bad, deal with it. It's just, I don't like the mother. She sucks, and maybe it's someone that could not cope with this world, especially this many years in, and she's finally hit her breaking point. She might be just she may be a victim of this world that took many years to finally succumb to it, but within the context of this world itself, and not the world prior to the bomb or whatever, she's not a good person. And maybe this is just me with the luxury of not being in that situation, sitting on my high chair, looking down on her, being like, oh, you're gonna abandon them just so you can selfishly die? Oh, you're a bad person. Maybe that's just me being like that, but just the callousness, especially in comparison to the man whose sole mission at this point is the safety of the boy, for her to be so completely just selfish and heartless toward both of them is it's striking to me.
Yeah, I guess that is fair. I mean, I don't think that she certainly shouldn't have done that, but I understand to a certain extent, like, her thinking there. Like, she is very afraid. She's basically, I think she just had a mental breakdown. Like, I don't think she could deal with the world as it existed anymore. Because she says, no, I'm speaking the truth. Sooner or later, they will catch us and they will kill us. They will rape me. They'll rape him. They are going to rape and kill us and eat us, and you won't face it. So she's basically feels like it's inevitable that they're all going to die in the worst imaginable circumstances, and she is at the point where she can't face that, so she wants to end her life on her own terms with a minimal, I guess, suffering. Like, I'm sure there's still going to be some kind of suffering for her, but it's not going to be in the face of unimaginable cruelty. So I do understand, she feels like she's trapped. She feels like no matter what, she's dead, and her husband's dead, and the child is going to be dead. So I understand her desperation, but, I do think it is kind of hard to do that, to leave them and to leave your son, especially in that situation.
Yeah, I feel like she thinks that it would be merciful to do that, to die on their own terms in a world that will only kill them worse the longer they survive. But I don't know. I just feel like I think that while I think she's trying to use that as a coping mechanism, as this is a mercy if we do this. But in actuality, she's just given up and refuses to take any responsibility that's been thrust upon her in this new world. I don't know, maybe I'm being harsh on her, but that's just kind of how I see it, especially in comparison to the man and how he feels toward the boy, and what we've seen as who the boy is and what he represents for humanity.
Yeah, I think like you said earlier, it's difficult, right? Because we have this vantage point that is, conditions in our world are living conditions are declining. Most people are experiencing sort of downward mobility economically. Life expectancy is falling. A lot of things, but relative to their position, we have it pretty good, relatively speaking. So it's difficult to say. I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with you. It's just I very much, I guess, identify with her profound despair, but that doesn't necessarily mean I condone what she's doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. But at least for now, that is a wrap on the mother as a character. We might get more about her, maybe some more flashbacks prior to her leaving later on in the book. But as it stands, that's all we can say about her at this point.
Yeah.
So now we have a situation where they have a real encounter with some of the fiends that the mother alluded to, with the bad guys, so to say. They're walking along the road, and that they hear the truck that causes them to get off?
That's one thing, that they were walking. They're kind of following the road, and they hear the engine, and it's backfiring, and it's misfiring. It's having a difficulty, but it's unmistakably the sound of a diesel engine coming through the mountain pass. So that's something that really triggers the father, because I think at this point, basically, that could only mean what you're saying is these bad guys, these rambling bandit murderer cultists.
Yeah, so they do their best to hide the cart, and then run away and hide in an embankment or something like that.
Yeah, they're like in the bushes in an embankment.
Yeah, and they're waiting for everything to pass by, but then the truck dies, so the men are working on it. Meanwhile, one of them splinters off to answer the call of nature and heads right to them, which forces the man to essentially pop up and hold him at gunpoint. And we have this scene where there's a bit of a back and forth between them, where the man's trying to essentially get out of that situation quietly, and the masked man, the cannibal, the bad guy, whatever you want to call him, is essentially trying to call his bluff, and we get an altercation where he pulls a knife and goes for the boy, and the father responds by shooting him in the head, which gets some brain matter on the boy, and they book it out of there to try and hide from the rest of them, who are surely going to come and investigate.
Yeah, that was a very, very tense moment. That was one of the most exciting parts of the book so far. It was very well written, very tense. I just wanted to throw out here, this is a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier when I was referring to most of the writing is very very plain spoken, but in a good way. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just it's very it's just very clear. It's very, very simple. But here's an example. He wore a beard that had been cut square across the bottom with shears, and he had a tattoo of a bird on his neck done by someone with an ill-formed notion of their appearance. Ill-formed being one word. He was lean, wiry, rachitic. So that one word, it's like, so all of that stuff is very commonplace. You know exactly what that is. But then he comes out of nowhere and hits you with rachitic. I think that's how you would pronounce it. It means having rickets. So I think that portion is very good. It's very representative of, if you've never read the book, what it's kind of like. So anyway, they as Dusty said, so there's a little bit of a back and forth. The guy tries to bluff them to try to kind of get them to go back with him to the van, or not the van, the truck, and he's implying that they're, we're not bandits. We just, in fact, we need help. Why don't you come back with us? Because at some point he somehow gets the belief that the man is a doctor somehow, and anyway, he's just kind of like trying to get him to go back, but obviously the father's not going for it, and the guy is not being genuine either. He wants to lure them back so that they can be killed. But anyway, so after that guy's killed, they run into the woods, and they're having to hide. It's pretty grim. They're having to, they're running. The boy is obviously very, very scared. He's basically frequently on the point of a breakdown, and to this point, there's been a lot of like talking back and forth between the father and the son, and even though the son is not nonverbal per se, he does take on a profound reticence, because obviously what he's seeing is incredibly troubling, and think about it. You get some guy gets shot while holding you, and his brains fly out all over. It's stuck in your hair for, I think, like a day almost. Like that's about as bad as a situation as can happen, especially for someone that age. So they're kind of going through, and they return to their cart. After a while, they're trying to lay low. The father's kind of scouting things out. They come back and to the cart, and they find it's been ransacked. So basically, their situation has become just about maximally dire, and they're running out of food. And there's this moment where they're eating, I think, the last can of food that they have at the time. And the son asks the father if they are still the good guys. And I think that kind of goes back to that idea of what we were talking about before, is like the son is representative of hope and of like goodness and a sort of simple-hearted purity. It's like he was forced to deal with this this moment where they had to kill someone, and it's he's having to process that, and that's kind of a very powerful moment with the father and the son. So I guess next is they're heading back towards this town, and they're kind of looking in on the town. They're kind of scouting it out, and they can see there's some they can see some signs of people nearby, and they're not really sure, as one would be, especially given their recent encounter. They're very unsure about what is coming up in front of them, so they're kind of being careful. They're going into these houses in this town, and they're searching for food. And I think they also hear a dog in the distance, and I thought that was interesting because basically there is almost no description of like a lot of animal life or of plant life. I feel like a lot of that is gone. I think essentially a lot of, if you've ever seen pictures of, say, a World War I wasteland, look at pictures of Verdun, let's say, something like that. I think that's kind of the image that I get, is like this almost lunar, but also kind of a hellscape, like lots of gray, lots of devastation, and the natural world has been stripped away and almost fully destroyed. That's kind of the sense I get, is that basically there's not a lot left. Anyway, so they're going and they're searching through this house, and they're looking, and kind of as they're leaving, they see this boy, and last little thing about the dog here, as I'm kind of flipping, they listened. Then in the distance he heard a dog bark. He turned and looked toward the darkening town. "It's a dog," he said. "A dog?" "Yes." "Where did it come from?" "I don't know." "We're not going to kill it, are we, Papa?" "No, we're not going to kill it." Last little bit here. He looked down at the boy, shivering in his coats. He bent over and kissed him on his gritty brow. "We won't hurt the dog, I promise." So it's just like this. There's like this. The boy represents. I want to really hit home to the point where a lot of you are probably going to be annoyed, is like this is the boy is a metaphor for purity. He is a metaphor for what's good about humanity. It's that sort of the spirit of goodness that exists within, as I said before, probably the majority of people. Okay, so anyway, as they're leaving, they see a boy like near the house. The boy is also pretty close to the other boy. Is pretty close to the son's age, and they kind of see them, and then the boy sees them and starts to run away, and he's calling out to him, and he's trying to get the boy to come to them, and as he's calling out to him, his father, he grabs him and he's like, "What are you doing? You can't. You need to be quiet." And the son is wailing, and he's very upset, and he's like, "There's a little boy, Papa. There's a little boy." And he wants to go to see him, because there's another thing to think about. I mean, humans are mostly social creatures. There's a few of us odd ducks that are kind of recluses almost, but the vast majority of people are very social, and especially at that age, there's a strong urge to socialize. So he sees this other child, and he's distraught, because I'm sure this boy has never had a friend in his life. He doesn't know that sort of connection. So he has a lot of concern for this boy, because he says, he talks about, I want to see him, but he also says, what if he doesn't have a papa? That he has this concern for the child, that he's trying to, he desperately wants to help the child, just like he wanted to help the guy who had been struck by lightning. It's just this this desire for connection, this desire to help. That's one of the biggest hallmarks of the boy. And I guess one little last quick question. Little last quick thing. We forgot to summarize, to talk about it when we were summarizing earlier. I don't quite recall where in the novel it is, but it's just it's not just that the boy is too outwardly facing, although that is true. He notices his father's sacrifices, and like there's this one portion where I think it was back when they were in the mountains, right? When he was they've had like a little package, their last package of hot chocolate, and he mixed some in for the boy, and he wasn't gonna have any, and the boy scolds him kind of, and is like, no, we're supposed to be sharing. So it just to kind of hit that home, the boy, it's not just that he feels afraid of his father, or I just wanted to really highlight that before we get to the close, because we're pretty close to the close here. I just really highlight that it's not just the father cares for the boy and the boy is afraid of the father or anything. It is actually a very warm, compassionate, basically symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. But, the last thing we have to cover here before our cutoff point is their final encounter with another group of bad people, so to say. This is crazy. They feel basically like the ground shaking from this procession, and they hide, and as they pass, they see this large group of people. They're all wearing their masks, and they're carrying carts, and behind the carts are their slaves and their women, a lot of which are pregnant, that are being pulled along behind them as they pass. And we have what can be seen as this nomadic tribe, essentially, of people that are surviving. And I mean, it doesn't seem like it's very good for for many people in it.
There's a bunch of child slaves that they mention, like young boy slaves that are they mention are like basically they're like pulling the cart, and they're not dressed for the weather. Obviously, it's very cold, and I think he mentions that they're like in basically just in harnesses and maybe some like light cloth, but it's just like they're basically been reduced to animals almost.
Yeah, and you have to wonder how the food situation is for a group that large. Obviously, there's got to be some sort of cannibalism going on, but yeah, I can't imagine even for the standard foot soldiers, for lack of a better term, I can't imagine they're very well nourished either at this point.
No, it's about it's a very that was a very dark passage. You're just seeing how just I don't know. It was a very that was a pretty disturbing passage. Just in general, the way that they describe the people and the slaves and all that.
Yeah, and I think something that's more disconcerting is the man and the boy are not the only ones heading south, it seems like.
That is something that I actually didn't pick up on, but I'm glad that you mentioned it. It's I think that's true. Like with the climate change that we see, like they've mentioned that it's getting colder, and it has been getting colder. Like I think they're going through a period of global cooling. Where they live is becoming no longer survivable. So I think that's going to. I think you as you point out here, I think that's kind of seeding later. They're going to bump into different groups as they head south. I think maybe this first, because where we left off was roughly, and I did the calculation, almost exactly 1/3 through the book. So, as I said before, the book is it has no chapters. So, I divided the book in 3 parts, and it was where we left off was almost basic, in the middle of the page, or I guess 2/3 down the page, was exactly at the 1/3 mark for the book. So I think that for this first part here, if we can postulate that it's going to at least approximate the traditional 3-act structure, I think we've gotten to the end of Act 1, where we've seen, we've introduced the characters, we've introduced the world, we've introduced the stakes, and we've introduced what they want to do, right? And so, and then we've sown the seed for the big, as Dusty mentions, the potential conflict. They're seeing these road agents, these cultists and cannibals, and we're about to they're about to kind of step through this next part where they're probably going to come more into conflict with these people.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see where it goes. I've been enjoying this book so far, despite it being very different.
Yeah, it is very, very different. It is different from just about anything I've ever read, but I don't know. I really like it, and I am quite excited for what happens next.
Yep, I am too. I think that's going to do it for us this week.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you everybody for listening to the Sad Boys Book Club. Once again, I am Daniel.
I'm Dusty.
And we will see you next time for part 2 of Cormac McCarthy's The Road. Have a good one.
Take care.